Hello everyone, this is Double Canopy. I'm Joe. Today we have Idan Ben-Barak. He is an international best-selling author of children's picture books on science topics, especially microbiology. He holds degrees in the history and philosophy of science and microbiology from the Hadassah School of Medicine at the University of Jerusalem. He received his PhD from the University of Sydney. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So we just had our Thanksgiving holiday here in the USA, and I spent probably 48 hours thinking about microbes in my turkey. Australia does it have an analog to Thanksgiving?
Not as such. We do have a National Sorry Day, which was established, I think, in 2007, where we, as a nation, are apologetic towards the indigenous peoples of Australia that were colonized by European settlers. Can't say that's, kind of a national barbecue day and so forth, but it is a recognition of colonial history. Yeah, and there's no, and turkeys are not in evidence.
Okay.
Halloween is surprisingly prevalent in Australia these days. You wouldn't have thought so, because end of October, as you can imagine, may or may not be a cold, dark night. For me, who spent very little time with Halloween as a child, but I did get a couple of years in the States to kind of witness the thing in its full glory. And
seeing how old were you at that point?
I was 7, so my dad came up. Yeah, perfect time to just for a short kid with glasses coming over from Israel, which does not have a culture of scariness and spookiness and so forth, to be flung into this concept and the monsters and the scary costumes and so forth. It was a bit of a task to get my head around that, and then we went back away, and Halloween did not feature in my life at all. And then I came to Australia as a grown-up, and my kids in Australia, come Halloween, run around for candy and trick-or-treating, and the streets are full of kids. It's often broad daylight because the sun sets quite late in late October, and sometimes it's very, very hot inside those costumes. So you get, I'm trying to translate into Fahrenheit, the like 90-degree heat in these costumes. So it's a very different kind of Halloween. You get the feeling that something's not quite right here, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, always fun. What did they dress up as this year?
Every year it's something different, obviously. For last Halloween, my younger one went as a ninja, and my older one decided he was Moses. So we had to find a staff somewhere by the river and get robes and so forth.
That's great.
And of course he had to explain to everyone what the hell he was dressed as. Yeah, they had fun.
Great. So, do you have family members in the sciences? I'm wondering about what got you into science as a young guy.
A pertinent question. Aforementioned 2-year stint in the US is kind of a giveaway sign here, because my dad got his PhD in biology, neurobiology. The 2 years, again, people with a background in the sciences go, oh, it's the postdoc. So yeah, it was a 2-year postdoc at NIH, National Institutes of Health in Maryland, and he carried on being a scientist. He left academia very soon after, but carried on in industry and so forth, and was a biologist, is now still a teacher of biology.
Oh, terrific.
All sorts of programs in Israel where we originate from. And so I grew up with that. And I remember as a child opening the fridge, and there was food and so forth, and just in the drawer there was a little tube of interferon gamma, which was what his company was producing at that point, was developing and so forth. And it wasn't an approved medication or anything like that, but we had it just very clearly marked, so you knew it wasn't the anchovies, but that was the kind of thing that you kind of grew up with. And then when I came to into university studies, and we started studying about interferon, I'm like, oh yeah, the anchovy stuff. So you do get a bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's about it from my family. Yeah.
Was he a charismatic teacher? Did he impart a lot of cool lessons when you were young?
Not particularly in biology.
Okay. Did he try to scare you with the interferon? Stay away from that.
Again, not so much. It's nice to have come from a background where my mother is also a teacher, and not in the sciences, but I never got any signal that I could find of, you should really study this, or you should really be that kind of person or profession and so forth. And the history of it, as far as I'm concerned, is that at 16 or 17, I had the stray thought of, maybe I should go be a doctor. There was a girl involved.
Yes.
Of course, there was at 16. There's always a girl involved. And I signed up for medical studies, but didn't quite have the grades for it. And so off I went to sort of the next rung down, which was a biomedicine BSc. And off I went from there. The girl eventually got her PhD in biology, and then at age 40 something, like a few years ago, completed her MD studies, so she did become a doctor. I'm like, okay, that's a bit of a journey there. That's her story.
You never know where your path is going to lead.
Yeah, and I did not know where my path was going to lead, which was to, as you said, after a couple of degrees in microbiology, I left that field and kind of veered into the humanities, philosophy of science, still discussing the biological sciences, still discussing to a large extent microbes, but I left the lab. Nobody was very sad about that, neither me nor the lab. Apparently I'm not very good at the bench. Man, you need good hands, and mine aren't that good. And so I started thinking about microbiology and writing about microbiology rather than doing it, which again everybody's very happy about.
And was that interest sparked just by introductory courses where you're just like, I want to know more about the beginning of this and the history?
Yes, basically. That's about it. Yeah. That's exactly how it went.
Perfect. That's great. It's a good reason to have general education, I guess. It's like you figure out, and once you take it, where you might want to go.
Yeah, but you could see the spark a little bit if you looked closely at younger me, because in Israel, at least, a bio major is all biology. So you get a little bit of the physics and chemistry and a bit of maths and so forth, which again, I wanted to get out of the way as fast as possible to get to the real biology. Yeah, exactly. And then it's biology all the way through. And you have like a little bit of time to maybe play around with, but it's because we were in a biomedical campus that invariably meant that you went for more biology, and advanced this and extended that. If you wanted to know anything about literature or philosophy and so forth, read a book. But I kind of managed to find a very small course in medical history, the history of medicine, and I took that, and then that led me to another very small course in another campus which I had to go specially for, and so forth. And that was my bachelor's, and I thought it was just a little bit of a widening of the horizon, but it turned out to be the start of an actual, I wouldn't say career, because after my PhD, I too did not remain in academia. What I do now for work, to pay the bills, is research administration. So the Excel sheets and the email reminders and all of that. But somebody has to do it, and apparently I'm okay at this. So, but I did not become a fully fledged historian or philosopher of science. Again, nobody was very sad about that.
I don't know. The kids might beg to differ. I should say I couldn't find your book at the library when I went the first time. Both your first book, the one I first read, The Invisible Kingdom, was out, and so was Don't Look This, or Do Not Look This book. This one was out. Yeah. This was out too, but I found it again when I went back. So people are checking them out and looking at them.
Yay. And I'm not sure how to feel about people reading The Invisible Kingdom, which I think of as small wonders, because it originally appeared in Australia under that name, and whenever something comes out in the US, I'm happy. Yeah, more people read it and so forth. But again, invariably the American publishers go, well, we think there should be this little change, and I'm like, why? Really? Okay. So it got the name changed.
Why did they give you a reason why they wanted the title changed?
More commercial in hindsight. hindsight, I have no idea whether that's, whether that helped or not, but I'm not in a position to say. But what I did do is that my second book for grown-ups, which came out in 2014, and a little later in the US, I sort of soldered on the title of the book within the book. So that's like, okay, you're not changing this. You can't. So it was called Why Aren't We Dead Yet? It's about immunology, the immune system. And I kept repeating, for a good reason, not just because of that, but I kept repeating within the book, well, we're not dead because we have this thing of the immune system, we have this, and it developed, and so on and so forth.
You did that specifically for the publishers?
Not quite. Also, nobody promised me that anybody in the US would pick it up. They ended up doing that, but I think this one, let's see you change the title on that one, and they didn't. Nobody suggested that.
A nice strategy. I was thinking about Small Wonder. I think there was a TV show called Small Wonder.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can Vicky the robot. I remember growing up, and there are.
Yeah.
She's a small wonder, but she's fantastic. Made of plastic.
If anything, that would make it more commercial, right? Somebody might find a book and get it because it had that name. I don't know.
And there's quite a few books called Small Wonder or Small Wonders already, including one or two by authors I like. So, but it's a good title for the book. I'm like, never mind whatever else is going on. The thing itself, the book itself, does the title suit it?
Yes.
But again, all of this, it was in 2008. So it's been a while. And so when I said, I'm not sure about people checking it out and reading it, I think it's a nice book still, but the information thereof might be a little bit outdated.
Oh, really?
So, if I say, oh, this is an interesting development, you can read it with hindsight and go, well, that didn't work out, or everybody knows that. So it's not a newspaper that ages within a day or two, but it's a different sort of reading when you're reading it a book like that, a popular science book a decade later or whatever, because you're reading it with the benefit of some hindsight.
So you just said popular science. So you think some of these notions, concepts have become popularized?
Popular science is just the genre name. I actually don't like popular science. The name popular science, because of that. It breeds misconception. And I'll say again, Invisible Kingdom did not sell particularly well. It didn't become some sort of hit. It did all right. It's even got a medal from the American Academy of Sciences, which was very, very, very nice. They actually flew me to San Diego all the way from Melbourne, first and last time that kind of thing happened. And so I'm happy I wrote it. I'm happy that people who read it and liked it read it and liked it and so forth.
Sure.
But as I said before, I've got a day job. I'm not making a living off these books, nice how they may be, and that's fine. I know a couple of people who write for a living, write full time. It's not an easy life as well.
Sure. I actually really enjoy writing, but it is always very difficult. What I normally do is pictures and art and video, and that stuff I can do day in, day out, and I love it. And it doesn't feel like a crunch on me.
Yeah. So popular science, the genre is, you can see very firmly that's the genre I write in, at least for grown-ups. I don't do fiction. Usually people think, when they think about writers, the kind of the immediate conception of it is the novelist. And I do not have a novel in me. If there is, I'm not sure I want to find what it is. Once in a while.
Reading novels?
Oh yeah. I like reading. I like reading fiction very, very much. But I keep coming across the conceptions like, oh, you're a writer, so do you make up? No, not particularly. A short story or two that, again, I have no illusions about it being very, very good or publishable or anything like that. One or two children's books ideas, but I stick to, up until now, I'm sticking to my beat, which is science, and increasingly science for children. And I'd say even I try to find the questions or the issues that are not very simple. It's always, for me, not just about the facts and, oh, look, there's this interesting animal and it lives here and there's, and this is what it eats and so forth, which is, again, excellent in its own right, and kids should have these books to read and learn and so forth. And my focus is on finding things that are more, I would say, maybe abstract or a wider kind of lens. For instance, there's a book called We Go Way Back that was published in Australia 2021. a couple of other countries, and it's coming out in the US, February 2023. And
Everybody can buy it.
yes, do. It's a picture book. It's a 32-page picture book, and it asks, what is life and how did it start? Which is two very difficult questions, and I try to answer them both. And it's based off my PhD. Obviously, I couldn't cram all of my thesis in there, but the main theme is like that. And that's something that I don't think many children's picture books tackle. Like, okay, here's something big. Let's try and give an interesting and child level description of what's going on, for instance, in the question of the origin of life, and also make the point not only that this thing happened, but that there is a question, because it's a live scientific question. We don't know there's different definitions, so forth, and to give even small children a taste of what it means when a question is still not settled.
Right. I love it. I have kids, they're teenagers now, but, at all stages of development, you see these problems in their mind that they're grappling with, and it's just amazing to see the spark of curiosity open up. My daughter just the other day, she's a teenager now, what are we? What is this? Like, exactly, yes. Yes. It's a good question to ask.
Carry on thinking that only but don't let it overtake your life, because there's a stage there, and I think a lot of people have been through it when they're teenagers, when these kinds of questions suddenly get bigger. It's like overwhelm you, and you need to develop the tools to find these questions their place and to carry on with daily life as well. Which,
maybe they're not too old to read a picture book about it. It's a gentle introduction.
I don't know. I learned a surprising amount, looking back on it, about life and society and so forth from books that were not for my age level, sometimes for higher age levels and sometimes for lower. And like, I actually didn't know that bit. Thanks for the lovely illustrations for admittedly 8-year-olds while I'm 13 now. Okay, I'll take that.
I mean, I was looking at your Do Not Lick This book, and even that, it's like a refresh of important concepts. Touch it here. Now touch your teeth. You're like, oh God. I need to. I felt immediately. I need to brush my teeth. This is too much. But it's thought provoking. It keeps you on your toes, and it's good.
Yeah, and picture books are always the work of an author and an illustrator. Sometimes they're the same person. Obviously, I can't draw at all.
I was going to ask. Okay.
Even if I did, first of all, probably not to a national or world level, but even if so, working with another person, and Julian Frost, with whom I did my first two children's books, and with now Philip Bunting, an Australian writer and illustrator, with whom I did We Go Way Back, which we just discussed, another one called The Very Hard Book that just came out in Australia, and it's not about biology at all. These are...
I think I tweeted you when you posted about that, and I referenced microbiology, and you're like, no, this one's not about microbes.
At all. And I've got a couple more in preparation with two other illustrators, but all of these people are interesting and smart, and they know their stuff, and so you send them a first draft, and what you get back is something very different, invariably enhanced for the better. Sometimes there's like a misunderstanding or two. It's like, but the process of working together, it's a very stimulating relationship. And if you're talking about Do Not Lick This Book, then it's like, Julian has to keep reminding me that I actually wrote it. I'm like, well, I wrote the words, but we sat there and you said, let's do a collage with microscopic images, and then I said this, and then I said that, and so the thing itself developed in conversation, and then later in the back and forth of drafts and so forth, so that it's very difficult for me now, for instance, to say, oh yeah, I thought that bit up, or yeah, this was Julian, so forth. And specifically for the Not Like This book, we actually contacted a microscopist, Linnea Rundgren. She didn't know us. She was in another country at the time. We were sitting in Australia, and we saw her work and we emailed her in Sweden, and she said, "Yeah, let's do this."
I gotta say, the pictures are just incredible. They're so clean. I mean, some of the best electron microscopy I've ever seen.
Yeah, she's amazing at what she does, and by all means check out her work, because she does do this for a living, and not just microscopic images, but all sorts of things. She blends the technical aspect of it and the artistic aspect of it to a wonderful degree. And she's also a lovely person, because two guys in Australia said, "Hey, we're doing a picture book," and she said, "Yep, I'm in."
That's great. So how did you meet Julian? Was that through the publisher or?
No, funnily enough, okay, we'll start like this. Usually, if you have a writer of a picture book, and they come to the publisher and they say, "Here's the text," publisher most of the time goes, "No, thank you, we have limited capacities." But sometimes they say yes, and then they say, "Okay, let's find you an illustrator," and the publisher knows a wide variety of illustrator and thinks who will be appropriate for the text and so forth. And then there's a little meeting or conversation, which both sides kind of sniff each other's butt, as it were, and they say, "Okay, let's do this." It was completely different with Do Not Lick This Book. I was asked by the publisher, who knew about my non-children's work a little bit, and the publisher asked, "Would you like to do a children's book about microbes?" And I said yes. And I also have this friend whom I met at a party. He was the only one who thought it was a costume party, and so he came with a skirt of balloons. And I immediately thought, this is a guy I want to know. And so we met, and we were friends, not amazingly good friends, like ring each other weekly and see the game together and so forth, but we stayed in touch and so forth. And so I said to the publisher, "Look, I've got this friend. He's really talented. I want to do the book with him. He's got a mind for science." And also, by the way, as of a year ago, he has hundreds of millions of views for his short animation about trains. It's called
Dumb Ways to Die.
Dumb Ways to Die.
That's true.
And
it's awesome.
Yeah, I knew him long before that, so I can claim. And I thought he was a super genius way before that. And then the world woke up to it, and the publisher went, "Hundreds of millions, you say? Well then," and thus the deed was done. So it's a bit of an unusual beginning to a book, but it worked out.
That is unusual. I've never heard of that. I did one children's book as an illustrator,
right?
And been around the edges of the industry a little bit, and I've always heard that it's through the publisher. They arrange it.
I came to writing in the first place from a very weird angle, and so I didn't go through the creative writing courses and then maybe an MFA, wanting to be a writer and then starting out and doing the drafts and submitting them and so forth, and then finally getting accepted, and all that story that we know well is usually what it takes to be a writer. I thought of myself as a scientist and not a very good one, and then at some point, whilst I was trying and failing to complete a PhD in microbiology at the University of Melbourne, was a workshop for postgraduate students, and I went just for a couple of days respite from the bench, and it was there that it dawned on me, and more importantly on the people writing the workshop, that there was some potential there. It's like, let's do that. And from thence came Small Wonders, Invisible Kingdom, and I kind of carried on from there. It's
a very humorous book. There's a lot of jokes and humor.
Yeah.
Funny. And is that why they suggested you do a children's book, because of the humor?
Possibly. I'm very thankful for that, just kind of not needing to go through the rigors of being a starting out writer. I was kind of parachuted into the industry. It does mean that I have no idea what's going on, even after like more than 15 years in the business, as it were. I still don't know about many of the rules and the procedures and so forth. So
Maverick.
So a little bit, a very gentle one. It's usually
Maverick.
I usually just kind of wander around and then bumping into something like, "Oh, probably shouldn't have, said that," or okay.
When did you graduate college?
University. Yeah. College in the American sense is a bit of an odd concept for me. I earned my BSc in 2001, and then there was a master's in 2002 to 2004, and then I came to Melbourne in 2005 for, as I think I mentioned just now, a PhD in microbiology, which didn't work out. I probably could have finished it somehow, but it was clear to me at that point that I don't want to, and I'm not very suitable for a competitive career in academic science. And so when it wasn't even an opportunity, but an idea of switching a PhD to history and philosophy of science. I'm like, yeah, that sounds even less commercial than biology. Let's go for that.
Was that a mentor you had suggest that?
I found an article in Nature journal. Talked about a professor up in Queensland in Australia doing interesting work in definitions of the gene. The word gene means different things to different people who were even, I'm not talking about lay people here, have all kinds of interesting ideas, obviously, but
Sure.
even to working scientists, it depends on which field you're talking about. And that's not unique in science. There's all sorts of words and terms that are used differently and by different types of scientists, and that's true outside of science as well.
That one seems like a particular one that we should all be on the same page about.
You'd think, right? But it's the two kind of big ones for the evolutionary biologist. It's a unit of hereditary. So one unit of evolution that may or may not change. When you've heard about Dawkins's conception of the selfish gene, he didn't make it up, but he kind of popularized it and so forth. And so if you're talking about evolution, you're talking about a more abstract concept of a thing that mutates and changes and interacts with other entities, other genes around it, other elements of its environment, so on and so forth. And then you get to the molecular biologist, and what's a gene? And they're like, well, a gene is a bit of DNA that codes for a single protein within the body. That's it. That's a gene. Off you go. Yeah. And between these two definitions, and it's a spectrum, because genetic elements that are not strictly coding for proteins may be thought of as genes because they do and so forth and so forth. It's an entire panoply now. But between these two definitions, there's a lot of overlap, but there's also a fair amount of difference. And so what Paul Griffiths was trying to do was map this out and say interesting things about why that is. And I thought, you know what, that's a question I'm actually interested in. And I contacted him, and we both ended up a few months later in Sydney, where he still is at the University of Sydney doing very good work. And I found myself...
That was published in Nature? Or
yeah.
Okay.
And so just by reading the article, I kind of decided that this might be interesting, and I ended up not doing any work on definitions of the gene. I was doing, as I said before, about the origin of life and historical and philosophical questions thereof. And that's how I kind of went on my way. But by the time I finished that, it took me a while. I wasn't concentrating full time on my philosophy PhD. I was having kids by the time, needing to make a little bit of a living, and also, to my surprise, writing books. So I ended up not continuing in academia, but the writing bit led to a job, which led to another job, and that's kind of where I am now, writing on the side and doing just 9 to 5s in research administration.
Terrific.
So that was university. It ended with my doctorate being awarded in 2014. I was 40 at the time. It's a little bit embarrassing. I hung around universities for most of my life, not being paid for that.
I remember reading some great papers by just research people who've been in school all their life, contributing a great deal. So germ theory was developed in the mid-19th century, thereabouts, and that is still the main paradigm today. Is that right?
It's important to give the term as a whole, as it were, because the thing that was developed in the mid-19th century is the germ theory of disease.
Okay.
Because as you'll remember, and a lot of our listeners will remember, the germs themselves were discovered about 200 years before. Yeah, Anthony van Leeuwenhoek and his microscopes and so forth. And then there followed what in retrospect looks like a very curious period in which people knew that there are little monsters in the water, and hardly anyone made the connection that maybe eating and drinking these things can lead to illness.
Okay, so
Maybe
that's
eating and
interesting
drinking.
because people used to drink a lot more beer over water.
Yeah.
They made the connection that if you drink this fermented brew, that you're less likely to get sick from drinking water. From
Yeah, and likewise tea and afterwards coffee. Oh, it's fine if you boil it and give it a bit of taste, but for heaven's sakes, don't drink the water like that. And it's the kind of shared unspoken idea that
it was
there's something wrong there. We're not sure why, but this is what you do. And that's how humans are, and we do that as well with a lot of things that we don't quite understand. I don't know why, but it works, which is that's, if you boil it right down, as it were, it's empiricism. You do the experiment, and only once you get the results, then you may want to build a theory that explains it, a wider thing. But
plus we can't see the germs.
Exactly, and that's a huge barrier to understanding if you can't see it. Again, in retrospect, you think, well, we know there are large animals, and we know that there are medium-sized animals, and we know that there are very small animals. Here's an ant, here's a flea, and so forth. Couldn't anyone just picture the next level down?
No, it's really hard. It's really hard to imagine.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to make that leap. And the thing that eventually made that possible, and that's a point that in history of science kind of gets made again and again. People, including scientists, including very smart people, do not look where they can't see. So germ theory was only enabled by the fact that we had this contraption, the microscope, that enabled us to actually have a look there. You can see one or two people having a think about maybe there are invisible organisms before the microscope, but it was just kind of mental wild goose chase. This might be a thing, and so forth. And so that's, again, for me, that's fascinating. The human mind did not go there until it was kind of dragged kicking and screaming by the tech. And then, as you say, germ theory of disease came 200 years later. The prevalent notions of disease at that time, before the 19th century, were incompatible with the idea that germs cause disease to a large extent. Obviously, there's a lot to unpick there, and we won't go through an entire course in it.
Sure. But so the germ theory of disease, did they have a sense before that was developed, or even around the time in the mid-19th century, that there were beneficial aspects to these little monsters? Or
I don't know.
Or there was just a mystery.
I think, and this is, although, again, I do have a degree in history of science, I didn't look very closely into that part of history. I don't know that there is. I think they were looked on, again, generally, more as a curiosity. They didn't know what these animals were. They didn't know what these creatures were. And the idea of, and what to us now seems like a very natural idea, kind of interlocking web of biochemical and geochemical relationships and the ecosystem and so forth. That was very much in its infancy.
Well, I mean, even now, I think the geochemical aspect, it's the relationship that microbiology has with the soil is even newer and even less popular. I think it's becoming popular now, but I think it's still not very well understood.
Yeah, and I think that's a very exciting time to live in that respect, like seeing up what we're discovering about microbes, about fungi, which is, you look at the research done, and all the research goes, well, there's a lot more to this if we can only, start getting the research funding and start getting the people to dig into this, sometimes literally, and see what these amazing creatures are like. And hardly anybody understands. You understand very, very little of fungi and of soil microbiology and so forth. First of all, and this is harking back to what I said a few minutes ago, because we need the technology to understand the interrelationships between everything that lives in and beside the soil, and what the plants and the microbes and the fungi and so forth, and what the air and the sunlight and the water, all of that. You need some serious computing power and observational power and genetic technique to figure out that environment and what that means and so forth. We didn't have that up until a few decades ago.
Yeah.
So this is happening, and I told you I think in our introductory emails to each other that I know very, very little about soil microbiology. So we're not going to
a little, yeah.
I know just enough to say what I've just said, and that's about it. And so I was like, okay, this is where my knowledge stops, and I'll hand you over to actual experts.
Yeah. Well, I actually found your book when I was doing some research on Rebecca Prescott's recent study of microbes in lava tunnels in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And these tunnels have been more or less shut off from the outside world. They exist on their own in a hermetic sort of environment. They're eating away at the rock. These little microbes, they're making soil. I found the word solubilize. They're turning the rock into a solution that plants can one day eat. Yeah, it's just incredible. And
they're basically chewing away at the solid lava. Yeah. This is a bit in history of microbiology that I know slightly better, and it keeps coming up throughout the history of it that people are aware of the existence of microbes, and then there's environmental conditions in which clearly no living thing can survive in terms of temperature, pressure, saline content, so very, very very salty conditions such as in the Dead Sea. And everybody goes, well, it can't be any life, and then somebody goes and takes a look, and then you find some super hardy commando microbe clinging onto life in previously unheard of conditions, and having an amazing way of biochemically dealing with the extremities of their life. And everybody goes, oh, okay, wow. And then we go and research a little more, and there's more than one of them, and apparently there's an entire community, and suddenly you have the ecosystems and taxonomies of microbes living where previously it was considered completely incompatible with life. And once or twice you make that discovery, famously in thermophiles, heat-loving bacteria, where that turned out to be exceptionally useful as well. And an enzyme in a particular thermophilic species of bacteria turned out to be essential to the widely used PCR technique, which everybody's heard of now because of the coronavirus tests and so forth. And without it,
I think you wrote about that in your small book.
And suddenly you have this this thing that nobody thought existed, and then somebody said, oh, look, it is. And it's like, okay, well, nice for them. And then a decade later, suddenly it's crucial to the entire field and to world health as well. So it's a good lesson in why people should actually go poking around in places where they shouldn't, and the commercial aspect of it does not seem straightforward. I'm like, have a look. Let's see. Maybe you have something interesting there anyway.
You remind me of the talk around the disappearing rainforests and all the critters and flora that are there that might one day lead to better medicines. It's a similar idea. We need to study these things so that we might apply it somewhere else. Who does that? They find something, notice an interesting property, and then connect it with some medical or whatever application. Is that somebody reads the paper that was written and figures it out, or?
That's a good question. I'm not the industry expert in commercialization. There's probably people that you want to talk to who know a lot more and would be very interesting to talk to. From the little I know, there's quite a few avenues around that. So there's academic labs, for instance, in which the modus operandi is that if you go on holiday or anywhere you go, bring back some dirt. So people go off and it's like, look, this is from Hokkaido in Japan, where my family lives, and I brought back some dirt and got it through customs, and let's see what we can find there. And then they sift through and they have a look at the proteins and the DNA and see whether there's anything interesting or even possibly useful. You can do that. You can come the other way and try to find problems, for instance, a medical problem, and find it genetic solution and engineer from scratch, because now the computing power is starting to be available for that, to actually do intelligent or AI-based engineering of proteins and the genetic sequences thereof and so forth, and then put that into your standard E. coli microbe and ask them to make a few tons of that. Or you can start out with an existing microbe and try to tinker with its properties a little bit. The safety procedure is firmly in place. Obviously, you don't want the Hollywood scenario of the runaway microbe.
How likely is something like that?
Highly unlikely. Because microbes, in order to be dangerous to people, and we've all experienced what it's like when that happens, but that needs a very particular set of circumstances.
And that's just related to the life cycle of the organism itself.
Yeah, exactly. So for instance, the coronavirus came from an animal, as we know, that almost certainly a bat or something like that. We're not sure, but it was already an infective virus. What it needed to do to jump that barrier, that species barrier, was some sort of small mutation, maybe not that small, maybe a couple of mutations or a bit more, in order to be able to infect particular types of cells in the human body. And every organism has its own version. Things that might be lethal to your cat wouldn't affect you at all, because we don't have that particular target that pathogen is targeting in a cat, and so forth.
It would get into our body and it would just die. And
die, because for an organism for a pathogen to be successful, which we're not happy with, obviously, but for it needs to be viable. It needs in a body. It needs to be able to reproduce. It needs to be able to move from one organism to another somehow. So, for instance, if you're an HIV virus, exposure to air is pretty much lethal, which is why it's an STD. It needs two bodies to be in very close contact for it to move safely. It's kind of like an astronaut moving between two spaceships. You can't just hang around in space for too long. So each organism needs to find their way of transferring and doing that again and again and again, and on top of all that, somehow managing to evade a very efficient immune system that most human and animal bodies have. Some of us are immunocompromised, and it doesn't work very well, and you are susceptible to infections in that case. But for a pathogen to be successful, it needs to very quickly find ways to survive and thrive in what is a very hostile environment. And so that doesn't happen a lot. And if you start out with something that's quite innocuous in the lab, and you're just trying to build a protein that converts one acid to another for industrial purposes or something like that, then for it to suddenly become dangerous to humans is such a huge leap in terms of change that it doesn't happen. When things do become dangerous for people and cause outbreaks of disease, it's always things that we're already making trouble, either in an animal that's very close to us, another mammal, or something that was causing disease in humans but of a different sort, and then made that little switch. Evolution does not proceed in huge leaps and bounds.
Right, gotcha. And there are industrial applications everywhere. We have a lot of biotech around here. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. Even on this little island that I live on, Alameda, there's biotech companies all around us. One thing that's really interesting is training fungi or bacteria to eat, hazardous waste like oil spills, or environmental plastics. Will they figure that out? Is that going to be resolved one day? They'll have bacteria that can just easily do that and reproduce on their own, just release them into the environment?
I'll start again with a disclaimer. I am not an expert in this. I'm not a working microbiologist. I'm certainly not a working microbiologist in the areas of bioremediation, which is what you're kind of talking about.
This will be the speculative.
So it's like very speculative and looking at it from a bit of a wider angle, as it were. I'm hopeful. I think these things can be done. Nature does find a way, and when we ask it to do these kinds of things, then it does. The question is, there's a couple of questions. There's many questions, obviously, and I'm thankful that I'm not the one in charge of solving them because it's a hard job. One question is whether that's scalable. So a lot of industrial microbiology, a lot of the problems it encounters is, okay, we've got a protein, we've got an organism producing that protein, or any kind of enzyme or whatever, and it can do the thing we want it to do. Fine. Can we make enough of it for it to be efficient? Can we produce it in a way that's commercially viable? If you're not an academic laboratory, then unfortunately, you need the money for it to do that, which sometimes means private investment, so for people who have the money and the will to do that. Sometimes it means government investment, but in each case, you need to make the business case that this works, and it can be, it can be done efficiently rather than just we do this a little bit and it works on a very small scale. You need it to work on a larger scale, and then you have the problem if you do manage to get to that, and well done you, because it's a huge task in terms of engineering and chemistry, and then you also have to make sure that it doesn't run away with it, because if you do imagine, again, this is a little bit sci-fi, but imagine that you have found a microbe that's able to digest plastic at will, and there's obviously a lot of types of plastics, and they're very different to each other chemically, but just something quite popular. And then it gets loose, and then suddenly, people's plastics just start disappearing. So
it goes airborne and starts eating the milk carton.
Yeah, it's just Hollywood call me. There's a script in this, yeah,
a microbe.
Exactly. So you also need for it to be controllable in some way. So. And making up that process, that industrial process of plastic comes into the factory or whatever, and then innocuous and possibly beneficial outcomes emerge. That's difficult. And because we use mixed plastic usually, and that's how it comes into the recycling plants and so forth, it's a task to find the correct combinations. And we're talking about environmental conditions as well. What's the right temperature? What's the right pressure? What's the right pH conditions, and acidity, and so forth. So it's a huge task, and I keep reading about people and companies trying to do that and succeeding to an extent, and hopefully that just grows and becomes more efficient. And I'm hopeful again, but we need to appreciate that it's really hard.
Well, UV too, right? Sunlight. Does it kill all microbiology?
Who said the dose makes the poison?
Okay.
UV light.
Speaking of like the Pacific, what do they call it? The patch. Yeah, the big patch. It's exposed to a lot of sunlight. If you could maybe tent it and then release your microbes, I don't know. Just sci-fi ideas.
Possibly. As I recall, the main thrust of cleaning up that patch is just getting out there and cleaning it, which is there's a project, Ocean Cleanup, that's trying to do that. But yeah, I think that's more a case of just going out there and picking up your garbage rather than employing high-tech solutions, high biotech solutions. However, and I suspect there's people already doing that, it might already be happening, because we know that, as we said before, microbes thrive in all sorts of unlikely conditions. So it might be that
there's something already.
If we look close enough, there's something already doing that.
Well, it makes you wonder, because a lot of these particles are very tiny themselves. It makes you wonder how they got that small.
They broke down mechanically, as I recall. Yeah, but also chemically, and maybe even microbiologically. Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna ask, has microbiology advanced as fast as other fields of science, and what reasons why or why not?
The question itself is interesting. I mean, the concept of comparing advance rates between sciences is, I'm trying to get my head around it a little bit, because what's the measuring stick here? What are the parameters? In every science, in every discipline, you can see that once it's been kind of established, then the low-hanging fruit was done over and done with reasonably quickly, and then the more complicated problems start emerging, and people start working on them, and then they advance at this or that rate, but it's very difficult to compare
The reason
rates.
The reason I ask is, especially in relation to soil science and soil health, it seems to a lot of us people who have made the connection to nutrition and microbiology account in soil and regenerative agriculture, these ideas of we need to protect the microbiology in the soil to do all sorts of things. That was figured out a while ago.
Yeah.
And here we are, where we have a UN report saying that we have like 50, 60 harvests left because the soil has been so degraded. Grapes of Wrath, the movie, what came out in the 40s, the book came out in the 30s. I can't even remember, but that's a while ago. So I wonder, these ideas advance, the science advances, but obviously there's a delay in how quickly things can catch on and be adopted in the mainstream. And
yeah, that's a sociology of science, and it's just a basic political science question. So I'm even less qualified to answer that, obviously. I try to be optimistic and to say that at some point within these 50 to 60 harvests, somebody will go, you know what, we probably need to manufacture some food and find ways of doing that, algae and bioengineering and growing food in vats and, protein from crickets and artificial meat. Something surely will happen to feed at least some of us. But you're right. It's a vexing question. Yeah, of science and policy and public understanding and awareness of soil, and the gap, because it's not instantly commercializable. I think that not enough resources are being devoted to it. So because the land is like, the ground's right there, so it's okay, and the harvest is still coming in. So we don't need to worry about it now. And hopefully people will start worrying about it before it's too late. And I completely agree with you that this needs to be more on people's minds. But so far, apparently, we're more involved in who owns Twitter now. So, okay.
Yeah, sure. So that makes me think too, I remember 5 to 8 years ago, there was a lot of talk about, and still from a health and nutrition perspective, the importance of your gut biome in people's guts. It was a popularized concept. It was like floating around. People were talking about it and drinking probiotics and whatnot. So I think it's interesting that people thinking about microbiology has had periods of popular
awareness.
Yes,
yeah,
popular awareness.
Yeah. And I'm happy to. That's one of the bits I'm happy with when the Invisible Kingdom book that came out in 2007, 2008, and microbiome was just starting to kind of emerge in popular consciousness, and I referenced that, and I said, look, interesting things might be happening, and then they happened, and then, as you say, they kind of stopped happening in the public sphere. You can hear a lot about the microbiome, even in public, definitely in scientific circles, and it very clearly. Our gut microbiome, particularly, but other types of microbiome definitely have, an effect on human health. It's a significant part of our life, but it turned out not to be immediately interesting. So if you sent over a fecal sample to a company or a body that analyzes your microbiome, and it so happened that I was involved in something that necessitated that, so off it went, and it came back with the results. And the results are like, usually, oh yeah, you've got more of this than you probably need to, and a little bit less of that, and there's a huge lot of species listed, and you want to eat more fiber and more veggies and less sugar.
Yeah,
and that's true for just about everybody. Yeah. Obviously, there's people who will, for whom the report comes back more alarming, or your doctor might look and say, oh, actually, we need to address this in a more urgent way. But it turned out that the landscape of it is complicated and complex. And so
do you have a sense of how many species live in us?
Hundreds. And this also brings us to the very interesting question of what exactly is a species when you talk about a microbe? And that's an open question. I will refer you to academics on the topic, especially a book called The Philosophy of Microbiology by Maureen O'Malley. It's a good read.
Okay.
And it addresses a lot of the fundamental issues in microbiology.
What's the question there? Is it the evolutionary differences or
When you think of a sexually reproducing species like ourselves, or let's go back to cats, we can say that there's a fairly good definition. It's not perfect, and I have a friend, John Wilkins, who wrote entire books about the idea of species throughout history. And there's enough there to fill at least one good-sized academic book. So I hope he doesn't hear this. But you can kind of see the reproductive definition of species. There's two creatures, and they can come together and bring forth another creature that can also do that. So that's a species. Mm-hmm. Okay. And a species can be able to reproduce within itself. If you get two animals and they are they're not able to reproduce, or reproduce and the offspring isn't viable, like a mule, then obviously that's not a species. That's two different species. So you get to draw the line at a certain point. There's a few problems with that, but that sounds straightforward to a human being because we're sexually reproducing ourselves, and most of what we see around us is also sexually reproducing. But then you get to fungi, you get to plants, and you see that it's not that simple. And then you get to microbiology, and microbes aren't sexually reproducing in the way that we think about it. Mm-hmm. They've got their own versions of sex, but microbes, as we know well, can just bud off and reproduce themselves asexually. And if the offspring is a little bit different to the parent, as it were, if that even makes sense to talk about that, when does it become a different species? Mm-hmm. What happens to that? You can draw the line between generation 1 and generation 2000 and go, oh, and here it turned into a different species. Here it evolved. So in microbiology, you have to start talking about things like gain of function and loss of function, but it's a definition that's very clearly something that a human made up rather than an inherent quality of nature. Mm-hmm. And it gets really interesting. If you're that kind of person, which I am a bit.
Yeah. Well, it makes me wonder, especially thinking of the lava tube, where there's a specific food source for them, like basalt. Mm-hmm. It's just one element or one source. But then they find something else, maybe in another niche next door. And then they have to adapt to eat that, and it's a similar microbe, but it's making adaptations and changing it. At what point is it different?
Exactly. At what point it's different when it has that adaptation. The somewhat interesting questions: when is it different enough to be called something else? Yeah. And is that actually interesting? Where it's like, no, it's just names, it's just word, whoever, just as long as you do the thing.
Just do the thing.
Yeah. Okay, you can live off citric acid now. Yeah. Good on you. You're a citric acid James. Let's move with that.
I have a question written down. How many species of microbes have... Oh, okay. How many...
I think we've just answered that, haven't we?
Yeah. Well, how many have yet to be discovered was the question. And it's...
So that kind of species the dilemma of definition notwithstanding, and not actually knowing what the future holds, but just extrapolating from the history, most of them, like we have no idea how big this goes. Every time anybody looks closely, you find more and more stuff. We haven't even literally scratched the surface of what goes on under the soil. It's like geothermal layers and so forth, and what goes on deep inside the earth. And there's just so much to figure out. We're not gonna stop discovering anytime soon.
Okay. Yeah,
it's very exciting.
You would say.
Yeah. I suspect it's the truth, or at least the popular opinion nowadays.
And it's my understanding that there's more beneficial microbes than harmful ones.
Are we counting them off one by one or per species or what?
No, just biomass wise. What's one outwits the other?
Okay. So I'm going to unask the question in like 3 different ways now because, oh my God, you've got a philosophy person here. The first question you need to ask is what beneficial and harmful means, and whether they are incompatible with each other, because we know that there are not just microbes, but any old thing can have benefits and harms. The internet. People, cars.
How about a creature that doesn't harm us versus does?
And there's very clearly, because of what we said before, in order to harm us microbiologically, not like it's a crocodile or a piece of wood that kind of can cause harm physically or chemically, to harm us biologically, a pathogen, a microbe, if it's a species of bacteria, virus, or anything else, it needs to be extremely well adapted to its environment, which is us. And there are not that many species that can do that. Not that many kinds of bacteria, of viruses that can do that.
Like that.
Whereas literally every other species has its own host of problems, and so you can things that harm sheep but don't harm humans. An entire list of that. Things that harm any other creature, and then beyond that, there's a much bigger sphere to take the wide view. Very nearly all microbes who could not care less about human beings, could not care less about mammals, could not care less about other organisms.
They're missing out. They're really.
I don't know. It seems to be that to just kind of kick back and go, you know what? I'm here in my little cave. I'm here.
Very little.
Yes. Yeah. And I've been doing this for 40 million years. I do not need anybody else. I'm good. I'm at the bottom of the ocean, subsisting off this, this patch of mud in complete darkness and horrible pressure, and there, nobody comes over to borrow the toaster. I'm fine.
That's very, very illustrative.
So yeah, and look, they've been here before. And they were here before us. Very clearly, the original forms of life were microbial, single-celled, and almost as clearly they will be here after us, because they're adaptable to such a wide variety of environmental conditions. And so we multicellular organisms are a kind of anomaly in terms of life. Most of life has been, still is, and will be microbial. We're hanging along for the ride.
Have people calculated the potential biomass, the actual mass of microbes versus other forms of life? Because I remember there was
surely someone has. I don't have the figures.
There was a study about ants, and they said that the biomass of ants outweighed the biomass of human beings by a lot. It was,
and you can't help but picture a biomass of ants, and then you're like, oh, I have lost my appetite for the next few hours.
Picture microbes, big slime ball.
Yes. Oh God. But surely there's a lot of. I mean, even the biomass of one human being contains a couple of kilograms. Sorry, Americans, 4 to 5 pounds of.
Some people a lot more.
Well, yeah.
See a big beer belly. It's candida, right?
If it's a big beer belly, then what you have here you'll have some candida, but you also have a lot more fat cells, or a lot bigger fat cells, so you need to kind of factor that back in. But I'm not going to be doing the calculations at this point, but every person has like 1 or 2 pounds, and that's even just with the actual humans. So yeah, the biomass is loads, much more microbes than there are really anything else.
Yeah. I was thinking about I'm a movie guy, and I feel it's so funny. There's a movie for every industry or science. There's a movie about a ballerina, there's a movie about a fireman. They show aspects of that profession, and there are a lot of movies about biologists, microbiologists, because of pandemic movies or zombie movies, Outbreak.
Yeah, Outbreak, yeah.
Yeah, Outbreak is a classic one.
Isn't it?
Did you like that one? I rewatched it recently because COVID stuff, but
I haven't seen it.
oh, okay. I mean, it's a movie. It's like,
Yeah.
you know,
I know of it, and I've read the synopsis. Well done, Idan. But I like movies, but apparently I'm not a movie guy because there's a horde of movies that I haven't watched Jaws.
Oh.
Who hasn't seen Jaws? That kind of thing.
they just had that in IMAX, and I missed that. I should have seen that because it's really a great movie.
I'm sure it is, and there's plenty of amazing movies that I just kind of haven't gotten around to yet.
Well, another Spielberg movie that I was thinking about for this conversation is War of the Worlds. Have you seen that?
No. I've read the book.
You've read the book?
I did.
Okay. So
I have.
what gets aliens is microbes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's...
that seems really implausible.
It is. At the point where the book was written, which as I recall was like 1920s, that would have made more sense because we didn't know, at that point we didn't know that DNA is the genetic material. We did know about DNA, but most people who knew about DNA kind of discounted it as, something in the body and so forth. It was quite loopy and so forth. We didn't know a lot of things about specificity of disease. We didn't know how everything works in terms of, what's now known as molecular biology. So it would make sense, even if you decided to kind of drill down and make it very plausible. It did make sense on a scientific level that kind of thing might happen.
Right. But
not to mention that it's very satisfying from a literary perspective. It's like, that's a good narrative choice there.
We've reached.
But even with the science, I'm giving H.G. Wells a pass. Like, it's okay. You didn't know. You had no way of knowing.
So what we know now, the opposite might be more plausible, right? That they wouldn't be affected by our bacteria, germs at all necessarily.
Yeah, again, it's, if you think about interacting with, again, a sick cricket, that cricket is extremely unwell. It's very poorly. Should I be worried? No.
Right.
It will not, nothing that it has is liable to infect me.
Right.
And the hypothetical Martian is literally worlds away from even that cricket in terms of how its biological operating system might work. There is no reason to suspect that something that it has will affect us microbiologically and vice versa. Unless we're actually both, you originated from the same stock and somehow got to separate into two different planets, and I'm sure there's books about that as well.
Ours isn't that far away.
Yeah.
So what movies about microbiology do you like? Like zombie stuff or?
I can't do with the scary stuff. I'm a very timid soul, unfortunately. My son is now starting to get into films as well, and
fun.
He's 14. He's sitting beside me as we speak. Hopefully not listening too much. Hi.
Hi there.
But he knows that if there's, if it's a family movie night or he wants to show me something, it better not feature anything horrible. What microbiology films do I like? I cannot come up with a good question. I will tell you my favorite science movie. And which is going to be surprising because hardly anybody thinks about it as a science movie. It's Peter Weir's Master and Commander, Far Side of the World.
I love that movie.
It's lovely.
I've always thought of it as a science movie. It's the subplot. It's plot B, but it's really it's right there. Those two plots are basically side by side. I don't even want to call it a B plot.
Yeah, it's intertwined. Of course, they drive each other and so forth. But you can just see the Doctor.
You feel it.
It's very frustrating. It's like you're nearly there. You're nearly Charles Darwin. Like decades before him.
Yeah.
Come on, make that leap, but he can't because he's a naval doctor. He doesn't have the opportunity that Charles Darwin had for reflection, for popularizing, and for thinking about it for 20 years. Because Charles Darwin was a rich man by marriage, so he could afford just sitting there in his house. Admittedly being very ill, but kind of thinking about it and writing a book for 20 years and so forth. And that admittedly fictional doctor, maturing in the Master and Commander, is just trying to do his best with very limited amount of time and resources, and not quite coming up with the theory of evolution.
Yeah, it's a terrific movie. I love it. And has your son seen it?
Surely. Yes. No. Yeah. We showed it on family movie night.
Great.
He wasn't very taken, unfortunately. It grows on you.
Yeah.
Much like the microbes themselves. It needs a couple of watchings, I think.
I'll have to show my kids that again.
Yeah.
And get to enjoy it again. Peter Weir is one of my favorites, and I was driving around listening to music, and AC/DC popped up, even Men at Work. I'm like, there's so much good stuff out of Australia.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Nick Cave. I can go on, but it's for a country that's there's like 23 million of us. That's about it. I think we're punching above our weight, and at the very least in entertainment and
publishing.
It's getting a little closer to home now, so I'm trying not to. Yeah, but this worked out well, didn't it?
Yeah.
And there's a very interesting stuff coming out of Australia, starting with novelists and fiction and so forth, but also kids books. I think and again, I'm part of this, so I'm not objective, but you step into a bookshop in Australia and you're like, things are happening.
That's great.
Things are coming out on a weekly and monthly basis that you're like, oh, good stuff here.
So do you have a project lined up next?
The new one is called The Very Hard Book.
And what's coming out?
Okay, so publishing schedules, as you'll know, are horrible. You start a book, and then months and months later, the book is finished, and then you wait for like a year. And if you're in Australia, for instance, then after it comes out, there's a lag time of between a few months and infinity, in which you might hope for the book to come out in other countries. So Do Not Lick This Book, for instance, which is by far my most successful book commercially, was published in, I think, over 20 languages. Vietnamese, Mongolian, so forth and so forth. And that's, very rewarding. And I love every author's copy that they send me with a script that I can't read and so forth. And I've got my little shelf with all of it lined up and so forth.
That's amazing.
It is. It's very rewarding and far beyond anything I dreamed I'd be able to accomplish. And a lot of it has to do with Julian Frost, the illustrator, and Linnea Rundgren, the microscopist, and so forth. And other books have been translated, and I think all of them have come out in the US. So they've all had a US edition, but that takes a while. So the book that US audiences will be seeing next from me is We Go Way Back, which I finished writing in 2020.
Okay.
It's still good. It hasn't hasn't gone off or anything.
Isn't expired?
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about events that happened like 3-4 billion years ago. Still relevant, I think. And then there's one called The Very Hard Book, which is not about biology, as I said. It's a series of metacognitive puzzles for kids. It's funny, and it's come out in August in Australia. You can find it if you search for it. I urge you to do so. And a US edition may or may not be happening.
Okay.
And then there's two books that I'm working on now. I've got contracts. They've got illustrators attached. There's drafting involved. There's files flowing back and forth. One of them is about human senses.
Okay.
I think I list about 12. There are more than 5 senses, my good man, and I think that's
I'd get educated on it.
You know this already. I mean, I won't give away the twist ending. There is no twist ending to this book, but you have, if you consider what a sense is, a human sense, for instance, and there's animal senses that we don't have, but even for human senses, it's whatever neural input comes into your body. So you've got light, you've got sound waves, and you've got input from the sense of touch, and you've got input from your taste buds and sense of smell and so forth. But there's also other input. If you know that you're not lying on a bed now, you know that you're upright, even if you close your eyes.
Sure.
There's a sense of balance. If you stick your arm out forward, there's always, and again, not looking, you still know where your arm is. That's known as a proprioception. It's a very immediate sense. We use it all the time without thinking about it. Without even thinking that it is a sense. And there's all these other senses, and you can, if you look at the nervous system, each one has its own receptor. Pain is a sense, hunger is a sense, and so forth. You can figure that out scientifically, and I think, again, mature functioning grown-ups don't have a conception of this. They go, oh yeah, 5 senses. Like, no, over a dozen, sorry. Depending on your definition. And then there's animal senses, and that's where we, the thing opens up quite a lot, because a lot of animals have senses that we literally do not possess. Magnetic sense,
Interesting.
I won't get into it. Read the book when it comes out around about 2024.
Terrific. I bet somebody has magnetic sense, some human. I bet there's something out there.
An interesting question, and the more researchers look into magnetic senses, and we know about homing pigeons and bacteria with magnetotaxis, so it exists in nature. And then I read a paper that says cows have it.
Oh, interesting.
And well,
is that why they're all walking in circles right now?
Might be.
Have you seen these videos?
Yeah, it might be.
Yeah.
And why you can find cows, I'm not that familiar with cows, but sources tell me that cows are often found all of them facing the same way in a field for no apparent reason, and all that kind of thing. So, and other mammals seem to have some sort of conception of the Earth's electromagnetic field. And so we're like, has anybody looked inside our brains? Maybe we have that, and a bunch of other senses. So that's one book. And another one is about the brain and why it's like that.
Why it's like that?
Yeah.
That's funny.
One of the answers, here, any fundamentalist Christian young Earth supporters who listen to your podcast might want to switch off, but virtually every book that I've written is actually about evolution, which, because it's a fundamental biological principle, it underlies everything that we can see around us in terms of biology and life. And the reason why our brains are like that is that they evolved independently and with no engineer steering the development in the right way or making the rational decisions. Kind of evolved to work within an environment, and this is how we ended up with this immensely useful but hugely imperfect machine inside our skulls that leaves a lot to be desired, doesn't it?
It sure does. But it's a good place to start from and work with. yeah, and there's literally no other place to start from. So yeah, I'm gonna try and cram all that into a picture book. It's fun. That's terrific. Have you ever considered like doing educational cartoons versions of the books or video games? I know Julian has done game versions of his.
Yeah. The idea is kind of always there. But first of all, needs to be said, my books are not that hugely popular that people just, clamor and bang on my door. Let's do this for that book. Let's do this other thing. They sell okay, and they give satisfaction when they're read, but they're not like huge international hits that people go, oh, it's got to be a card game version of that and so forth.
Sure.
And I suspect that if I were a somewhat different sort of person, I would have looked into just having one for fun or whatever. But developing a game is or indeed any other medium is something that requires careful attention. I think I like that what I do, because I don't do it for a living, I can take my time a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'd go, okay, I need to, get 4 books out in the market this year. Otherwise, the electricity is turned off. So I try to do high quality stuff.
Yeah.
I try to get it right. And for games, whether it's, or again, any other medium, comics and so forth, just coming up with that kind of thing myself, finding the funding for it, finding the time for it, and doing something good.
Yeah,
that's a huge undertaking.
Yeah,
but if anybody wants, I'm very happy to listen to ideas. If anybody comes like, you know what, I think this is a good idea, and I know a great game developing company. Yeah, okay, talk to me. But otherwise, I leave it to people who are actually good at it and excited by this kind of stuff. And I have my little niche, very microbiologically thinking. It's like, I have my little niche here, and I'll write picture books, just survive off of that
for 40 million more years.
Hopefully.
Well, Idan, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking with you today. Thank you for starting so early with me. You're in Melbourne, I'm in California.
We made it work.
Yeah, made it work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.